Mike, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
I'm 30 years old. I'm 6'2", average between 240, 260. Was very athletic in school, bench pressed 375 pounds, ran to try and lose weight and stay fit. And I've just tried staying pretty well in shape most of my life.
From the age of 3 to the age of 10, Mike, you had a huge fear of werewolves. What's the story behind that?
Well, when I was 3, my parents, for some reason, I guess I was asleep and woke up in the midst of it all, thought that watching Silver Bullet would be an amazing thing that night. And because of that, from the age of 3 until about 10, I had such a horrible fear that I could say the word werewolf in a day, maybe twice, and that night I would have a horrific nightmare. But on top of the fear of it, it also fascinated me by werewolves.
Yeah, they are a fascinating but terrifying topic. There's no denying that. Do you still watch werewolf movies and study them?
Yes, I do. Actually, the way I thought of it was to be terrified of something is to understand its weaknesses. Because if you take something that's so powerful and you find out what its weakness is, it kind of takes the power away from what you're scared of.
That's a good point. Since you had your encounter, you've been dealing with some serious anxiety issues. Please tell us about them.
Well, any time I go outside after dark to take the trash out or just to help my wife and little girl inside, I'll keep my head down and just do what I'm doing and act like nothing's wrong. But the entire time I am outside, I make sure I'm listening at all times for anything. I just stay nervous most of the time when it's dark out, unless I'm in a very well-lit area or in town.
After you have an experience like that, it's only natural to fear the dark and have trouble doing things outside like that, especially after dark. From what I understand, through your life, you've had several paranormal experiences, but your dogman encounter scared you more than any of those other experiences. Please tell us more about that.
I have lived in a house that was accompanied by 3 ghosts, and it was me and 2 roommates. And we knew they were ghosts for the simple fact that electronics that were plugged into the same thing or off the same power cord would actually, if he was watching a movie, the TV would get turned off while the movie still went on. TV was brand new. Or a game would go off while you was playing it and the TV would stay on. We had a touch light that you had to tap to actually get it to brighten up. Anytime you would say that you needed to find something, the light without being touched would go out. There were times that we would hear glasses break or plates break or something being thrown across the room. And when we was on the other side of the house, when we came in, there was no sign of anything broken anywhere. And the third ghost was a little girl with long black hair in a black dress that always stood in the corner where the washer and dryer went. And every time that you'd walk through, she would stand there and you'd see her out of the corner of your eye. When you went to look at her, she would disappear into the wall. We found out later that that house was 150 feet away from a graveyard. And 2 years after that, we found the graveyard, and that land was actually where Indians were buried, Indian burial ground. So a lot of goodness there, and that compared nothing to the encounter.
Well, those sound like some awfully creepy experiences to me. If they don't compare to the dogman encounter, then that says a lot. A few nights before you had your encounter, you noticed something strange in the area where you lived. What was so strange that night?
Where it happened, there were a lot of dogs, and it's in Kentucky, so you are always surrounded by the woods. So you always hear everything. Growing up in Kentucky, you hear what's in the woods. You hear frogs, insects, everything. And the weird thing is, when you go outside, no matter what time of year it is, you will always hear something. But when it is so deathly silent that when you walk, your footsteps feel like they echo, that is so unnerving.
That would be awfully creepy. Before you tell us about your encounter, please tell us about the area where it happened.
At the time, I was living in an apartment complex, and you would turn off the 4-lane onto the road where the apartment complex would be. And it was about 20 buildings, front and back apartments, bottom and top stairs. And they maybe had anywhere from 15 to 25 feet apart. And they were all in the same area and conjoined by 2 giant parking lots that were well lit. And you would leave them, go up the road, and there were houses pretty close together. Right after you left the parking lot on your right, there was a house that said where actually a police officer lived, and they had a pit bull they called Thor that was 180 pounds. Would always bark, was always tied up so he couldn't get loose or anything, but he would always bark. And then you had a family across the road from them, and then you'd go up a ways, and there was a creek beside the road. You could take another road, and that would be farther up into another ending of the road. But if you kept straight, that's where I would always go. And it would go all the way paved until so far, and then it would turn to gravel. Well, right before it turned to gravel, on the left, there was a house there that an old man lived at, and he had died about 7 years ago. And he had an open field property where just his house sat, and it was flat land, and then at the back of it, it would go into the woods, given all around where there were houses. Within 20 to 30 feet from the house was surrounded by woods. There was a bridge that went to that house, and there was a flood, and it broke the bridge off and washed it away. So it left about a 7-foot gap between the road and that property. You would walk up farther, and after that house, maybe 150 feet, lived my aunt. And then after that, some more open field. There's 2 more houses, and then after you go past that, on the left, on the top of a hill that was gravel, lived my cousin. And I would go there frequently just to relax, play games, just spend time with, because we've always been really close, like brothers. And if you go farther up the road, it would go and show maybe 2, 3 more houses, and then it was nothing but open forest, and you could go up the creek into the forest, which was a 4-wheeler trail.
It sounds like it was a pretty sizable forest.
You are surrounded by the forest at all times. It basically was a giant bowl. In the middle was all the houses on the flat land, and then when the hills came in was the forest. And walking beside the abandoned house on your right, when you're right in front of the abandoned house, well, right after you pass the abandoned house going up the road, on the right was where they had literally cut the mountain in half to where they just put the road through. So there was about a 15 to 20 foot tall rock wall that was just flat all the way down until it went back to where it was just forest again. But at the top of the rock wall was nothing but wooded area.
Yeah, sure sounds to me like a perfect area for dogmen. All right, Mike, please tell us about your encounter. Give us every last detail that comes to mind.
Well, I would normally leave my cousin's house between anywhere from 11:30 to 2 o'clock in the morning, because from where I lived to his house was an easy 20-minute walk. 20 minutes shouldn't be that bad. And when I was walking down his gravel hill, to my left at one of the houses at the end of the holler, there was a dog, and it sounded like it was going crazy. Like, this wasn't a bark like, oh, I know you're there, or something like that, towards me. It was barking at something like it was terrified. And then it just stopped. And I brushed it off thinking, well, maybe it's just thinking, oh, well, I'm walking on gravel, it can hear me, it's just probably saying, get away from my territory. Didn't think anything of it. But once the dog stopped barking, it was dead silent. And on all through this, it was extremely foggy out to where I had maybe a 20 to 25 visibility range. It was so thick of fog, and the wind was blowing, not extremely hard, but enough to where it would mix the fog up, but not blow it away. So it was a little bit of a colder night. It was in the middle of September when this happened. So I walked down my cousin's hill, and I started walking on the road. And there are street lights on this road, one at my cousin's house, and then you go 200 feet, and you see another one at my aunt's house. Then you go maybe 100 to 150 more feet, and there's another one. And after that, there's one maybe every 50 to 75 feet where you get in the apartment complex area. So I was walking, and it was so silent I could hear my footsteps echoing. I kept on looking around because I just felt like something was wrong. It didn't feel right. It just felt just something wasn't right in the air. And I just started going, didn't think anything of it. It was like, well, I'll be home in maybe 10 minutes, no problem. I got to the open field beside of the abandoned house, and I heard this deep, just god-awful, just low growl. And I looked to my right, and in the middle of that open field, the grass had grown up, and it was dying out because of the cold weather, and I saw two glowing ember yellow eyes staring at me. And I could see the silhouette of a dog's head. But the thing that worried me was the body it was attached to was laying in the field. And all I seen was this giant black mass, and I thought it was a bear. But I couldn't really understand at that time why there could be a dog this big. And I just kept on staring, and then on the rock wall to my left, 15 to 20 feet up, something moved and knocked down 2 to 3 rocks. And these weren't pebbles or something from something small. These rocks were smaller than a bowling ball, but bigger than a softball. Like something wanted my attention to go away. And when I heard them slam down, they were 2 feet away from me. And I looked, and it was, if that, of 2 seconds. And I looked back, and the eyes were gone. There was nothing in the field. And it literally shook my soul for something that big to move and me not hear one thing. I always carry a pocket knife with me. And I had it in my pocket. I got it out, held it in my hand, opened it up, and started walking faster. Well, this dog at the officer's house that was barking all the time, this huge massive pit bull was in its house, softly whimpering, like it didn't want anything to know it was there. And in this fog, I could hear footsteps. And they were really heavy. And they were moving from side to side around me. And from the rocks falling, I knew there had to be more than one. It's not just a coincidence for that to happen. There had to be more than one. And they would always stay outside of my visual sight in the fog, but I could hear them circling, going back and forth across the road. I walked faster and faster until I got in the parking lot. And then When I kept on going and I seen the building that I lived in, I started to go into a jog. I knew that if I ran, that was the end. That was it. You don't run from predators. So I was jogging, and I know, yeah, that seems like running, but I don't know if I was jogging or literally running for my life. When I got to the door, I heard the growl again. The building that I lived in was up on a hill looking over at the road, maybe a 10-foot hill. And when I looked over, I saw the silhouette of this giant dog, just the head and its eyes glowing, looking at me. When I got inside, I locked the door and I locked the deadbolt. And I was shaking and sweating profusely. I got inside and went to my room. My wife and my little girl at the time was about 5 months old. And the pure fear that if this thing would have came inside, I know the knife wouldn't have done anything. I know I could not have done anything to stop it to get to them. No matter if I threw my life in front of it, it would take me as a snack and I would not be nothing to it. In our bedroom, the bed was against the window. My wife slept close to the door, my little girl between us, and I slept towards the window. I went to crack the blinds, so I could barely peer out, and I thought, well, if I barely crack it, nothing will be able to see me inside. And beside of the apartment is a basketball court, and on that basketball court is a telephone pole that has a street light attached to it. When I looked outside, it was under the light, staring at me with its glowing amber eyes, and I knew that it could see me with everything. It was standing on 2 legs, and just standing so casual, but the look in its eyes were so cold and so dead. I just froze and took every aspect I could. It felt like an eternity staring this thing down, when I know it was maybe 2 seconds. And then it went to all fours and ran up the hill into the woods.
That had to be awfully hard to deal with. What time of night was it when you left your cousin's house?
That night I'd left around 1:20 to 1:30 in the morning.
Okay, so it was pretty late. As accurately as you can, please describe the dog man you saw that night.
Picturing the size of the telephone pole to the broadness of its chest, shoulder to shoulder, I would say at least its shoulder to shoulder was 4 to 4.5 foot wide. When I saw it in the light, I noticed it wasn't black. It was actually gray. It was darker gray, but its like underbelly and stuff like that was like a lighter gray. Its ears were tilted forward. Its head was tilted down. I could still see its teeth, even with its mouth shut, bearing out. I don't even want to call it paws. It had hands. They were huge. And I want to say that it was easily 8 foot to 8.5 foot tall. Its legs were bent back like a canine. They were very muscular at the top, at the thigh, and then bent back like a dog's would. It was extremely muscular in the arms and the chest. Had a really thick, strong neck, and you could just see this huge muzzle on it.
Did you notice whether it seemed to have an expression on its face or not?
The expression it had when looking at me just told me that it let me live that night. It played with me. And I know there was more than one, but they played with me all the way to my door. And they let me live. If they didn't want me to live that night, I would not be here. It look was like, I let you live tonight.
Before we spoke, did you have trouble seeing what happened for what it really was? In other words, did you spend too much time looking at what happened that night as being a case where you got away from the dog man, or did you see it for what it was, the fact that the dog man or dog men let you get away?
After it happened, I didn't tell anybody about it. I tried to just black it out because the look in its eyes were cold and dead, like it had no remorse. It decided if I lived or died that night. I didn't. It could have ripped me apart in seconds. And knowing there is more than one, I know that me being as big as I am, there was nothing in this world I could have done.
That's right, there isn't anything you could have done. What characteristic about that dog man disturbed you most? Was it the eyes?
The eyes disturbed me, but what really disturbed me the most was something that big moving out of the field without making a sound. I didn't hear it get up. I didn't hear it run away. It was 2 seconds. I looked away and looked back, and this giant, massive thing that I saw in the field, laying there, was gone without a trace.
It is awfully disturbing to think that something that big can be so silent. How far was it from where you first saw that dog man to your home?
I was about 10 minutes of walking from my home. And that night, I'm pretty sure I made it from where I first saw it. And when I first saw it, it was about 15 feet away from me. But just enough out of the light to where I could just see a silhouette of it. And I made it home, I'm most likely going to say within 3 minutes, if not sooner.
Oh, I'll bet you did break a couple of land speed records getting home. I can understand that. For the last 2 years, you kept several fears that stemmed from that encounter to yourself. What's been the prominent fear?
Seeing one again. Where I live in Kentucky, like I said, there's woods everywhere. Even on the outskirts of town, it's surrounded by woods. It's a big town, but still, for it to literally go from civilization to you can walk off the main road onto a mountain and nobody even know you're there is what scares me, because you don't know if you're going to see another one. And you don't know if you're literally going to be able to make it, and they're going to let you by it again.
That is a pretty disturbing thought. You said you waited to tell anyone about that encounter. Who was the first person you told about it?
My cousin that I went to his house.
How'd he respond when you told him?
I told him he's going to think I'm crazy, and I told him just to bear with me, and I told him that I saw a dog man, and for some reason, without any questions to it or anything, he was like, okay, I believe you. So that gives me the worries of he's either seen one or he just understands that there's things around his house that he just doesn't want to talk about.
Yeah, there's every chance he did see a dogman out there. It's hard to know. How long did you wait to tell him about it?
That happened 2 years ago in 2015, and I told him 2 weeks ago, and it is 2017.
It sounds to me like you two are pretty close. Why do you wait so long to tell him about it?
Because whenever you see something like this, you always worry, no matter what you see, no matter how much you want to warn people. You worry about them ridiculing you for making a hoax up or trying to just scare people or lying. And you always have that fear of people laughing at you or calling you crazy for what you saw and for what you want to warn people about. But out of that worry of being ridiculed, being put down, oh, this person's crazy, That's so funny. Why would you think of something like that? They're not real. That worry just sinks down inside you, and you're so worried about what they'll say, what they'll think, what they'll do. And to be honest, I've listened to your show for about a month now, and listening to the eyewitnesses and everything, really, for them to come forward and for them to tell you about what they saw and me to understand that's what I saw, helped me to where I wanted to contact you so I could let you know my encounter and let people know, hey, they're just not over here or just in this state. They are everywhere. You just don't see them.
Yeah, they are in a lot more places than most people would ever imagine. Besides me, is he the only other person you told about that experience?
You are the third person that I've told. I told my cousin, I told my wife, and then I told you.
When you told your wife about it, was she good about supporting you, or did she laugh at you?
She's always been good at supporting me, even if she didn't have the same thoughts as I did of something. She understood that it shook me to the core. She asked me why I didn't say anything for 2 years, and I told her it just really worried me and bothered me that much. And she said, okay. Even if she doesn't believe it, she supports me. If that makes any sense.
That does make good sense. I could have read you wrong on this. I'm just wondering, is the fact that you're a big tough guy but you were so afraid of that dog man that night one of the hardest things you've had to deal with because of that encounter?
Yeah. I've never been the one to fight people or anything like that, but I've always been the big guy, and I never liked somebody picking on the little guy. So I'd always be the one that was big enough to stand up to somebody and be like, you need to stop doing that. The pure size, the pure mass of this dog man. I had a pocket knife with me that night. Every fiber of my being, I knew that that pocket knife was no more help than me picking up a twig. You feel so vulnerable, and to the point to where you could never fathom how weak and defenseless you feel until you stare one down and you understand that you're not on top of the food chain. This thing literally could rip me apart in 2 pieces, and it didn't even seem like it would break a sweat. And to know that, if it had broken into the house that night, there was nothing that I could have forcibly done to stop it. The fear of knowing that and having the fear that if it comes in, you wouldn't be able to stop it going after your wife and daughter is the most terrifying feeling there is.
Thank goodness you knew better than to try and let the wind out of that dog man with that knife that night. Which aspect of seeing that dog man was worse for you, trying to deal with the trauma of actually seeing it that night or worrying about the safety of your wife and daughter?
I have insomnia, so I normally will go a day and a half easy before my body just stops and I fall asleep. After that happening, I didn't sleep for 3 nights. Laying awake, always making sure I was knowing what was going on, knowing what was around me. After that night happened, we would always have the window cracked, just slightly, maybe an inch open, and there's a screen on the other side, a metal screen. And this would always happen when they were asleep, and I'd be up and I'd be playing on my phone or just sitting there in bed, just enjoying the comfort of being around them. And the light from the basketball court would always shine in, so you could always see it. Even with the blinds closed, you would see this yellow light shining on the blinds, giving some light to the room. And there were nights that you would see this huge shadow that literally would make it seem like somebody just turned a switch off on the street light and turned it off for a split second. It would black out the street light running by the window. That happened for 2 days after my encounter. And after my encounter, 2 days also later, Fish and Wildlife was around the apartments that I lived in, and they were measuring on the electrical poles that had the streetlights on them. And I asked a friend of mine why they were doing that, and they said that they were measuring the height because they felt like a bear was marking its territory. It was 8 feet off the ground.
You mentioned your insomnia. Did you ever have any problems with nightmares because of that incident?
Yes. For about 3 to 4 months after it happened, I would have nightmares of reenactment of that night and what could have happened. There was always the nightmares of the what if, like what if it broke in. You just have so many fears and everything that it builds up inside you, and the nightmares can just become so realistic that you wake up and you're in a dead cold sweat, and you have to literally wait a second and look around to make sure you're okay and where you're at.
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty hard nightmare to deal with. If you can't get any peace in your sleep, then you just can't get any peace, period. That's horrible. What do you think most people who listen to this show have wrong about what it's like to have a dogman encounter, Mike?
To have a dogman encounter, when I was younger, I had the fear and everything. I always had the scenarios in my head. Well, what if I saw one? What would I do? If I saw it do this, how would I react? When you see it, no matter what you think, no matter how big you are or anything, there is a primal fear that will shake you to your core. And every thought you have just stops, and your instincts start to take over and tell you that you are in grave danger. You're not in control of any situation when a dogman is involved. You are the prey.
Yeah, when they're around, you definitely are if they want you to be the prey. You saw that dogman from 15 feet away. What do you think when you hear about people who actively go into areas where they know dogmen are, looking to have an encounter with one?
You always think that it's not as bad as what people say. You always think, well, if we have guns or we go with our friends, it will be alright. But the thing from my encounter that I can tell you is this. No matter how big and bad you think you are, no matter how many friends you have with you or the firearms, the thing is this, if you take your friends with you and you encounter a dogman, if you escape from this and they don't, their life was in your hands and you brought them to that area. That is nothing that anybody should have on their hands or have to live with for the rest of their lives. These things are real. They could rip you apart within seconds, and there is nothing in this world you could do about it. No matter how fast you are, no matter how strong you are, they are the dominant one between you and them when that encounter happens.
You raised some good points. Yeah, when you're in their presence, there's no denying the fact that they're in control of the situation. If you walk out of there alive, it's because they let you. You told me in the pre-interview that even though it was really windy that night that you had that encounter, there was still a lot of fog. Did you find that strange at the time?
I did, because even though the wind was blowing, it was enough to swirl the fog up and mix the fog up, but wouldn't blow the fog away. And I always just had the visual of about, like I said, 20 to 25 feet. There was no farther, no nothing, but I could always hear them just outside of my visual.
With it being foggy like that, even though it was so windy, it sounds like something out of a horror film. When all this was going on, when that dog man was just 15 feet away from you, did you ever smell any unusual scents?
The thing is, I'm used to smelling dead skunks or dead animals, stuff like that, where there's woods all around. Like, you are used to smelling the forest. Stuff kills things. You smell it. I didn't smell anything really out of the ordinary. The one thing that just really caught me off edge was, out of all the silence of the entire surrounding area of the woods and everything being hushed, other than that growl, all I could hear was the water in the creek beside of me.
Yeah, that had to be awfully creepy. Are there any aspects of your life that your encounter has affected that you wouldn't have thought it would affect?
When I'm out at night, I'm listening for that silence or just something. I'm always aware and on edge when I go outside at night. So if I do hear something, or if it goes silent like that night did, I know that I need to get to a safe place.
It's going to be some time before you can get back to good and handle things the way you want to be able to handle things outside at nighttime. Whether it's a year or 2 years down the road, who knows? But after talking with you as long as we did talk, I've got no doubts that sooner or later you're going to get to that point, and that's good news. Well, Mike, it's about time for us to get out of here. Do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
For the people that are looking for dogmen, like I said, you want to believe, and a lot of people see it as seeing is believing. But you have to think of it this way. What if seeing it is believing, but you don't get to tell anybody about it? That was the last thing you saw. It is a truly frightening sight. And the horror that you feel that literally shakes through your bones. You don't know if you're going to make it that night. I was lucky. They let me live that night. I didn't get away from them. There's no way for them to move that fast without me hearing, for me to get away from them. They were playing with me all the way to my front door.
Well, Mike, I'm so glad you're seeing what you went through for what it really was. That's the key to your recovery. So, like I said, that's really good news. Well, thank you so much for your time, Mike. Thanks so much for coming on the show and telling us about that experience. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Vic.
Glad to. Have a great night, okay?
You too.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff, and I'll be your host for the show. If you've had an encounter of your own and would like to speak with me, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. Well, it's Memorial Day weekend, and I hope everyone's got some great plans lined up. And if you've ever served in the U.S. Armed Forces, I want to thank you so much for your service to our country. Instead of airing a normal show tonight, I've prepped a special Nothing But Encounters episode for you. I hope you enjoy it. Leading things off, episode 130, Hondo.
It was a September, I believe it was the 17th. It was on a Saturday. Beautiful day. I woke up and I wasn't feeling too good. I've been suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder here. Kind of got a little worse. Things just started closing in. I'm just going to go up to the mountains, just go hiking. It's a place right off the Appalachian Trail called the Nick Patch. All it is, it's just a little flat place right there, and you're surrounded by mountains. It's got a little rocky outcrop, and I decided to just hike up there. It's 5-6 miles right off of Highway 91 there. I grabbed my plate carrier, which is, if anybody's ever been in the military, you know what those are. You've got your magazine holsters and stuff like that. The only thing I took was my knife. I tried to stay in shape, and believe you, that plate carrier, that thing weighs quite a bit. So I just decided, just to get up and get away. I knew I was going to be up there overnight, so, I took some matches and a couple of MREs and just started hiking. It was beautiful. Like I said, there really wasn't a cloud in the sky. I would say it was around 70 to 75 degrees. So, just a beautiful day to be up in the mountains. So I was hiking about, 3 or 4 hours, and I passed some hikers coming in. Matter of fact, 2 sets. There was 2 females and a male, the last hikers I saw coming out, and it was starting to get pretty dark. So I decided to go ahead and set up camp for the night. So, I built a little fire and MRE and was just kind of chilling. Birds were singing, squirrels getting ready to bed down. If there's any hunters out there, you know how they act, right before they get up in their nest and bed down. It wasn't, maybe an hour and a half after I ate, that just all of a sudden everything just got real quiet. It could have been my imagination, but I swear the wind stopped blowing. And I heard a couple of twigs break, and I was like, okay, it could be some deadfall falling off some of the hickory trees that was around me. But then I heard a real heavy snap. And so I immediately put my back to the fire to try to get my night vision back, kind of get my eyes settled back on the darkness. And I'd say it wasn't 2 or 3 minutes after that, this thing just, the smell is what really hit me at first. It had a strong smell of cedar, and I knew there wasn't really too many cedar trees around where I was at, so immediately that kicked in that, something's not right. But then just the smell of wet dog really hit strong. And then just literally out of nowhere, this thing came at me. The first time it came, it stopped as soon as I drew my knife. I looked down, and I swear I believe it knew exactly what a knife was. I rolled up on the balls of my feet to get a good stance to where I could move, kind of like a linebacker does. It's the first thing they teach us in Special Forces when it comes to knife fighting. I thought it was a bear at first, but when it stood up, I knew something wasn't right. It didn't have the back legs of a bear. And when I got a real good look at the head, I tell you, I almost passed out. It scared the hell out of me. This thing had a head like a wolf, the hind legs of a dog. Then it's when I started noticing the hands. They had like raccoon hands with, I would say, 1.5 to 2 inch claws, maybe. But as soon as I drew my bolo knife, which is this little Filipino-style fighting knife, it backed up on 2 legs and stayed in the shadows, and it just let out a growl that felt like it was going through my soul. I've never heard anything like that before in my life, and I really I just felt like I was surrounded by pure evil. It scared me bad. I'm not one to get, easily frightened. I mean, every operation I was on, I was always scared, but never on the verge of losing control like I was here. I mean, it was an extremely scary situation, and it was definitely life-threatening. I believe this thing come out to kill me. There's not a doubt in my mind. But the way, the intelligence of this thing, which is absolutely off the charts, it would use noise and light discipline, how it would try to come in and outflank me. I would be looking in one direction, and you really couldn't hear it until it come out and charged me again. I mean, this thing charged me on and off through the night. It's really terrifying. I mean, I'm starting to get chills thinking about it now, especially just having a knife. I would have felt a little better if I had a handgun with me, but not a lot. I mean, this thing really took a lot out of me. It's really that frightening because I've never seen anything like this before. But after a few times of it charging, it knew that I wasn't going to be too easy a prey, I don't think. It's kind of why it hung back in the thicket and used kind of some huge rock formations that's up there, natural rock formations. You'd see it every now and then get on top of that, sit there and look. And it did this, I want to say, for at least a couple hours. It would move in, it would move to the side, and then try to come at me again. Now, the closest it got, I'm wanting to say maybe 15 to 20 meters, which is way too close for me. Like I said, I've never experienced anything like this. I've never heard of anything like this. I used to watch werewolf movies as a kid, but I always thought it was just a bunch of bunk. I've never really believed in anything like that before. So it's definitely an eye-opening experience. I went through this for at least 3 or 4 hours. It didn't charge constantly. It would sit back and wait for 15 or 20 minutes or longer to see if I would kind of lax in my posture. That way it could get in and take advantage of me either falling asleep or just kind of getting in that trance mode where you're just so physically and mentally wore out. And I believe that's what it was trying to do, which tells me that these things are highly intelligent and an alpha predator. There's nothing like it anywhere in the woods around here that I know of. Extremely, extremely dangerous. Finally, I want to say it was around, I didn't have a watch on me, Vic, so I'm sorry, I can't really tell you the exact time. It had to have been well over 5 o'clock when the sun finally started to come up, the first lights of day. And I think that's when it kind of I didn't know it had left until it started getting light. And I knew, that it wasn't anywhere close. And that's why I started egressing the area just to get out of there. And, I made sure the fire was out so it wouldn't catch the mountains on fire, and then egressed out of that area. And those were the longest 5 miles I've ever walked in my life. Because, it was still a little dark to where, there were still shadows, especially in those thickets, and I was just waiting for this thing to come out on me and wind up being a 411 case. So, the grace of God, I finally got out of there and came back home.
Episode 131. Jill.
I had spent the day with a new friend of mine. I'd met her at senior school. I was in my first year of senior school, doing what girls do, listening to music and doing girly things, doing a bit of makeup. However, it got a bit late. I missed the last bus. My mum couldn't pick me up because my parents were self-employed and they were quite busy with their own business. It meant that I had to walk home. It wasn't that much of a great deal because having grown up in the village, it wasn't that unheard of that you would walk home, either push bike or walk from village to village a lot. It wasn't abnormal to do that. I decided I'd walk. So we said our goodbyes, and there are 2 roads you can choose. Either you walk along the main road, which is a lot longer, and a lot more dangerous because the traffic can be quite heavy. There's lorries and everything. Or you take the shortcut through the woods. Obviously, you take the shortest route. Well, I wanted to take the shortest route, and I take the route through the woods. It was about 6 o'clock at night, or afternoon, evening, and it was starting to get dark. Now, the village roads, or the sort of rural roads in Germany, you need to imagine they're not necessarily all lit. Only parts where their houses are lit. The parts through the woods and past fields and meadows and whatever, you don't really have street lights. But then again, you're used to it, you just go on, and it wasn't completely dark yet. So I thought, oh, okay, just carry on. If you run half of the way, you make it home in good time. So I started walking. The houses stopped, fields started, eventually the woods started, street lights were gone. As soon as the woods started, I thought, oh, don't like it, because it was obviously getting darker by the minute, so I started running past the woods. And it goes down a hill a little bit. Obviously that helps with my running. And you run down this little hill, and there's what used to be an old mill, and this little stream and a bridge. When I got to that little bridge, there comes a bend, and you can see around this little bend, and I could see something sitting on the side of the road, and it looked like a big dog, just when you come out of that bend. And I thought, what is that? Looks like a big dog. Now, we've always had dogs, and I wasn't really particularly scared of dogs, but I thought, where does that dog come from? So it was a little bit uncomfortable, shall I say, but not, I wasn't scared. It was just a little bit uncomfortable because it looked quite big. So I thought, okay, obviously stop running. Started walking a bit slowly, and that dog started coming towards me. By that time, I reached sort of the edge of the woods, or there's always still it's not the main woods. How can I explain it? There's still sort of the odd kind of sort of bushes and some trees and whatever. It's never like a complete open area. And after about, well, it must have been seconds, that thing was right in front of me. And that was no dog. And it sat there, and I looked at it, and I thought, there is no dog. And my heart stood still, and I've never seen anything like it. Now, I've got to say, one of my aunties, who I'm really close to, she's actually a biology teacher. She has got her doctor in biology now, and I'm really, really close to her. And she does wildlife biology as well. And I've always looked through books with her, oh, look, this is this animal, this is that animal, and whatever. I've never seen anything like it, and certainly not around our area. If you live in a village, you know pretty much every dog, you know every cat, you know every hen, you know every bird. I'd never seen that dog, and I've never seen such a dog, and I've never seen that size of a dog. Now, it was still sitting there, and it looked at me. Now, I've got to say, it didn't look menacing. It didn't show aggression towards me, but I didn't need to because it was so huge. And I was frozen in fear. And then it stood up. It stood up on its legs, and I thought, this can't be real. The only time ever I'd seen dogs standing up was in a circus. But that was no circus dog. That dog looked like, I'm saying dog, it wasn't a dog. It was a dog man, what I know now. It was the perfect mixture between a Doberman and a black wolf. If you would take a photo or a portrait of a black wolf and melt it together with a photo of a huge Doberman with the upright ears, then you would have what I've seen. The face was quite, the fur on the face was quite smooth or smoothish. The ears were upright and quite large. The teeth were huge and quite sturdy, quite big. Although it didn't growl at me, but I could sort of, because it was sniffing me. And in the process of sniffing, it would sort of, how would you explain it? It would lift its upper lip. Is it a lip? Would sort of lift it a bit. The eyes. Now the eyes was when you take a bit of amber and you show a light through that piece of orange amber. It was almost like somebody wrote, and I thought, it was real. It was breathing. I could see it breathing. I could see it moving its nose. It was nobody playing a trick on me. It was huge. It was over 6 foot. It was towering over me. It had paws, but his front paws weren't paws. It was a mix between a paw and a hand with claws. That's why when it was sitting there, I thought there's something not right about this picture. But when it stood up and I actually looked at it, and I thought, this is not a dog's paw. This is a hand. This is not a hand. This is a paw. You know, I was completely confused and started sniffing me. I was so scared. My life flashed in front of my eyes. I was so scared, and I'm so embarrassed to say it. I wet myself. I was 11 years old, and I wet my pants. And I thought, I'm going to die. And I thought, I'm going to die. And then I noticed that dog man looked over my shoulder all the time towards the bushes. I thought, why is it looking there? And I thought, and I dared to look over my right shoulder as well. And there was another one behind me. I thought, that's it. I was definitely going to die. That dog man behind me was even taller. That thing in front of me kept sniffing. That thing behind me was staring. And I thought, I just put my hand in front of my eyes and I thought, I'm going to die. And then I remembered, I thought, I'm so scared, I'm going to die. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? And all I could remember, all of a sudden, was what my nanny said, when you're scared, start singing. So I was standing there with my wet trousers, that thing in front of me, staring at me, sniffing me, that knowing that thing behind me, I thought, that's going to bite me in the neck in a minute, or bite me in the back, or I thought, that's it. That's really it. And, you know, when you so, I could just cry. The tears were streaming from my face. It was horrible. It was so horrible. And I thought, I'm going to die here. It was, and even, now the memories come back. I even remember what the weather was like. It was damp. And it was getting more and more dark. It was damp. The street was slightly wet. It was nightmarish. Absolutely nightmarish. Anyway, I put my hands in front of my face and I started singing, like my nanny taught me. I can't remember what I was singing. And it doesn't matter what I was singing. I just put my hands in front of my face and I started singing loud. I was singing my heart out. I was standing there, tears streaming down my face with my wet trousers, and I was singing. I was standing on the side of the road with that thing in front of me, with that other monster behind me, and I was singing. And I thought, I was just waiting. I was waiting for the pain. I was waiting for it to come behind me, to bite me, to kill me, to eat me. But it didn't happen. It did not happen. It didn't bite me. It didn't kill me. And after some time, I don't know how long I was standing there, singing, I dared to look, and they were gone. They were gone. I looked behind me, they were gone. And I ran. I ran so fast. I ran. It was, all of a sudden I could run. I didn't even scream. I didn't waste my time screaming. I just ran. I ran home. I was in such shock. I was just, I made my wet clothes disappear. Was standing in the shower, just carried on crying. I didn't see my parents because they were still at work. And I just went to bed and cried myself to sleep. That was it.
Episode 133, Dave Leidy.
That whole
general area of the country, I guess it's pretty unique in its own way. The northeast portion of PA, we're not talking all the way up to the top of the state, but just where the Appalachians come in. So you have the river, the Delaware River's there, and all the lowlands that come up to the river. You have a lot of roadways, you have roads that run along the river, you have a lot of railroads that connect and interconnect in the area, and there's a couple of bands of mountains. I think the Blue Mountain is the first one. I don't know how many other mountains are connected to that or what their names are that come across there. So there's a lot of different kinds of topography where you have the swampy lands, you have lowlands, and you have hills, and you have foothills, and then there's mountains and anything else you can think of all kind of rolled into one. We were up and down the Delaware River. We were along the canal. We were pretty much lost in the woods a lot of the time, and that was mainly because we had to do a lot of traveling between the outlying towns and look for places that weren't posted. I really didn't want to trespass if I could help it. Guys around there had no problem firing shotguns full of rock salt, and I definitely wanted to avoid that. So the first day, we followed some tips from the eyewitnesses and his friends. And so, again, like I said, to take a closer look, I grabbed my friend Doug to come with me. Doug's an Army veteran with combat experience, and he's been asking to tag along with me for a long time. So we brought our usual gear and loadout. We had 45 each, and this time I brought a metal detector. I never brought a metal detector before, but I figured out what the heck. We, of course, let people know where we were going and the general area we were going to be in, what time we were expected back. Nice to know that somebody knows we're out there. And that was it. It was still early December. The weather was pretty good. It was kind of cold, but pretty dry. And there was still a lot of leaves on the trees. So the two of us checked out the Hexenkamp area, but we didn't really find anything besides squirrels. We walked and drove all over the roads, railroads, woods, and trails all the way around that area. From that hill by the Delaware to the Delaware Canal woods, we went through Easton, and we checked out the Martins Creek area and above that. Then we stayed the night at a friend's house in Belvedere. And the next morning, we went to the Bangor area, and we headed north again. We had been parking the truck and hiking into mostly park areas all over the place. We were looking around, and then we'd come back out again, and that's something we just basically did all day. We found some caves, what looked like old mines, some cool railroad stuff, and some really dark patches of woods. One of them was near a nuclear power plant, and there was a few times that we were kind of really nervous, and a couple of times we felt that whole deadly quiet thing and watch feeling. The time that was most intense with that was in a patch by the Delaware River. It was had a place near a place called Foul Rift. I don't know if that's the name of the place of the Delaware or its actual town or what. I'm not sure, but it's close to Martins Creek and the power plant, and there's the quarry nearby. So we were careful to stay on park property. There's real security around those places, and I didn't want to tangle with those guys, but I'll tell you, I'd love to talk to them and see what they see and hear what they hear. Anyway, near dusk, we were walking through the woods by the river above the power plant, and it felt pretty desolate. So after about 30 minutes, everything got really quiet, and we both felt this intense watch feeling. It got kind of uncomfortable, and Doug and I looked at each other and non-verbally decided to stop where we were and just watch. After about 10 or 15 minutes, the forest noises came back, and that feeling we had just stopped. It's almost like the sun came out. We didn't see anything for sure, but we both later said that we saw shadows moving through the trees. It was too far away for us to say what it was, but it definitely felt really ominous. I actually have a theory about that silence, and I've experienced it many times in different places in the country and different encounters or just out in the woods sometimes. Everything just goes quiet, and you start looking around, see what's going on. I can understand if higher animals quiet down when there's a predator nearby, but that doesn't really explain why the insects stop and why the woodland sounds stop. And I've been thinking that it might be our own nervous system that filters out the noise when we feel threatened, and maybe that the silence is personal rather than environmental. I don't know, it's just a thought. I'd be interested to bring a tape recorder with me and see if the noise actually stopped or continued while I was having that feeling. So we left that area and thought about checking out one more spot on the edge of the Blue Mountains before it got too dark. At this point, I think that Doug was starting to get a little freaked out. He denied it, but I think it was pretty obvious. It was already getting pretty dark, so we decided to go back in the morning and give it another try. So we decided to stay indoors again. Sometimes we camp out and experience everything during the night too, but we decided not to do that. So I have some family that lives in Bangor, and we just kind of showed up. Actually, they were pretty happy to see us. We had a pretty good night, and we sat around a bonfire and hung out till pretty late. Just before we were turning in for the night, we heard two distinct howls from two different directions north of us. We all looked at each other, and someone in the group said coyotes. Doug and I didn't say anything, but I'm sure that we were both thinking the same thing. So we had a big breakfast with them and wound up staying way too long, and we left in the early afternoon. I was kind of tired anyway. I didn't really feel like walking around all day again, so we left and went north. Doug started to complain a bit more now as we were walking, so I was definitely going to make this our last trip. I know that a lot of his problem was that he was getting a little bit more freaked out, and I don't think the howls that night really helped at all. I think it rattled him a little bit. So, as I said, we decided to hike around this day in the Blue Mountain area and leave around dark, which really wasn't that far off anyway. I couldn't tell you exactly where we were. We were somewhere on Blue Mountain, Route 191. We were a little bit past two power line cuts that run over the mountain. We didn't see many houses, except for some a while back. And we didn't see any postings either. So we parked the truck and we headed into the woods. We were a bit past where the guardrail ended. So there wasn't really a trail, but there was an open area past the embankment. So we just headed up the embankment and straight into the brush and the rocks. We were about a quarter mile in. I noticed that some of the rock formations were kind of strange. There seemed to be a lot of deadfall in the area, too. The hill wasn't really too steep, but it was rugged, and our progress was slowed down a bit. I could hear Doug mumbling to himself back there. I was beginning to think that one of us was going to twist an ankle and all this stuff. But, again, I was noticing that the rock formations looked almost like a wall. It was really weird. It wasn't exactly man-made looking, but they had an unnatural look to them. I also knew if we kept going, we would eventually hit the Appalachian Trail, but that was maybe another half mile off or so. So we were walking and scrabbling up the hill for maybe another 20 minutes, and we started to hear voices coming from up the hill. Eventually, we saw some hikers coming down the hill, and they looked like they were through hikers from the AT. And I couldn't imagine why they were coming down here when they could have crossed the highway or they could have reached the Kirkridge shelter in about 2 or 3 miles. When they saw us, they seemed to get really excited, and they came down, and they were all talking at once. Eventually, we got it out of them that they had been stalked by a bear or something for 2 days, and they were totally freaked out. They wanted us to walk them down to the bottom of the hill, babysit them. So we did that. We walked them down to the road. And I was walking next to a guy named Chris that seemed to be in much better physical shape than I was. Anyway, I talked to him. I asked him where they started. He said that they started around Harrisburg. He said that they get together every year as a group, and they do about 100 miles every time, and they try and do it all in a long weekend. I mean, well, that's pretty ambitious. But I didn't say anything. He said they were scared off the AT. They were never scared off the AT before, but this time it was really weird. So I pressed him for information, and he finally told me that the bear they saw looked more like a wolf. And they decided to leave the trail when they saw it standing by a tree. He wasn't the only one who saw it, but it was a ways off. So they may have been wrong. They may not. They don't know. They just decided to call the trip off because they're all sufficiently freaked out. So we left them off down at 191, and they thanked us for the armed support. I had forgotten that we looked kind of tactical. I tried to imagine what we looked like to other people. They were really the first people we'd met. We were out in the woods, and that was a little strange. That we spent about 20 minutes with them and pointed out some nearby lodgings so they'd know where they were going. I had imagined they knew where they were, but they accepted it gratefully. So we started walking back up the hill, and Chris asked me why we want to go back up, where they just warned us not to go. And we just kind of shrugged and told them it was okay. We were just looking around. They obviously thought we were nuts, but we all went our separate ways. So we started back up the way we came, and Doug asked me what I thought about their story. And I said it sounded like we were on the right track, and either that or they were seeing things. He said he didn't like it, and he was kind of irritable about it, but he eventually shut up. So we took the same route that we did before, as you could see the ground where our previous steps had been. And we had gotten about a half a mile up after about 20 or 30 minutes. I was looking around at the rock formations again, and I was just about to say something about it when suddenly, like thunder, Doug fires off 2 rounds from behind me. And I'm thinking, what? And I look back, see what the heck he's doing, and I see that he's in a flat-out dead run down the hill. And I look back uphill, and then I see why. Coming out of the trees is what looks like a large dog, but it wasn't. My first and lasting impression is that he was a young one, maybe a juvenile. He came out from behind the right side of the rocks and was just standing there on 2 legs. I definitely saw movement behind and to the right of him, but I wasn't sure what it was. I was just kind of shocked. He was light gray with kind of darker streaks, and I don't think he was any more than 4.5, 5 feet tall. I'm 6'4", about 240 pounds. He was uphill. I could tell that he was a lot shorter than me, and maybe our weight was about the same. I'd say he was about 35 yards away. I know what I should do, but at that point, I was surprised and I felt frozen. A lot of things go through your mind in about half a second, and what seems like forever. And the space of probably about half a second, I dropped everything that was in my hands, and I did the worst thing that I could possibly do, and I ran like crazy back down the hill after Doug. I didn't even think about my gear. I didn't even think about drawing my gun. I just didn't think. As I'm running, of course, I knew I should have probably stood my ground, but Doug was running, and a switch in my brain just did the same thing. I couldn't see him real well. I couldn't see him at all, actually, but I could hear him crashing down in front of me. The hill was covered with dead fallen rocks, but I was running downhill over it all as if it wasn't even there, like it was a flat, level football field. At first, I couldn't hear anything behind me, but then I heard some branches breaking back there, and I kept thinking that his mama was chasing me down the hill. I could see the road, and I thought if we could get to the road and the truck, we'd be okay. So I reached the tree line, jumped down the embankment onto the road, peed myself, and just kept going, ignoring the pain in my knees. I saw that Doug was already on the other side of the truck and yelling something at me. There were no cars, and I ran to the truck door and fumbled with the door. It finally opened, and we jumped in, and I grabbed for the door. At this point, I looked over at the woods and saw that the dogman had just reached the embankment right above the road, and just then went from like all fours to standing upright. As long as I live, I don't think that there will be anything scarier to see than a dogman standing there on 2 legs in all his glory. I mean, I've been through some crazy stuff in and out of civilian life, but there is nothing more terrifying to me than a dogman. He was definitely the same light-colored guy that I saw before, and actually pretty short. He had that same German Shepherd head, amber yellow eyes, long arms, short tail, and he was standing on 2 legs. He's kind of hunched over. His mouth was slightly open, and I could see his teeth and his fangs. He was pretty muscular for his size, definitely solid looking. It was a little strange, though, because he really didn't seem to be focused on us. He was kind of looking from side to side. At that moment, a red SUV with bikes on the roof came around the corner and screeched to a halt. I could see the people inside freaking out as they all looked at each other. And the SUV backed up and spun around and took off in that classic wheel-smoking TV turn that we always see. Just then, another truck came the other way. It was some kind of official truck or maybe a forest vehicle. It was white with a big blue stripe on the side, lettering on the door, had a bank of lights on the roof, and something in the bed. He screeched to a halt, and then those two faced off. And I could see the guy with his arms wrapped around the steering wheel and his mouth wide open. I thought this was probably a good time to get out of there, but I didn't want to make any noise. I knew that starting the diesel would be really loud. So the official, or whatever he was, decided at that moment to flip his lights on. They were orange and white. They seemed to be pretty bright, probably LEDs. Well, it seemed to be the right move, and two things happened at that exact moment. As soon as the lights came on, we heard a very loud but relatively short howl coming from up the hill. It was like a coughing bark howl. I can't really describe it, but maybe he was leaving already. I don't know, but as soon as he heard that, he dropped off fours, made one single bound up the embankment, and was gone. As soon as he was within the tree line, he was completely invisible, like he blended right in. Wow. I could feel my heart pounding out of my chest. I looked over at Doug, and he was trying to crawl into the passenger footwell. Big help there. I looked over at the official, and he was just staring at me. I was thinking maybe he could give me something for my report in my head, but I thought, okay, that's cool. And I started to slowly open my door, and at that point he slams his truck into gear and takes off, screeching his tires the whole way. Okay, no help there either. I probably should have known better. These are the guys that tell us there's no mountain lions in PA either. So after a while I closed the door and started the truck and drove off.
Episode 134, A Mill.
It was basically when I just turned 7. My birthday had just passed, and my cousin had just had her birthday. She lived with my grandma at that time. My grandma would throw birthday parties, family gatherings at her house. The only thing is her house is a lot closer to Lake Nicaragua and the rainforest than my house. My house was a little closer to the city, where my mom lived. And I will go there with my mom. You know, sometimes I will stay with grandma the weekend, go to school, the coming Monday. This time, it was a gathering because of my cousin's birthday. And I basically was told by my mom, hey, listen, I need you to run an errand. Just come back quickly. We're running out of, because this is part of our tradition in our country, to always have cooked beans or tortillas. So she will give me the money, and I knew where the ladies that cooked it on the other subdivision is, and it was about maybe 37 to 40-minute walk. Not too far. I've done this before. I never ran into any problems or encountered anything. And I went a little late. It was around 5:15. When I went, I have the containers in my hand, and the road where I'm going has a creek. The creek on one side has rainforest, and the other side you have houses that are, you know, the people live in. As soon as you get away from that and you head towards Lake Nicaragua, you start seeing that there's less houses, there's people. And at that time they were building stuff, so there was nobody living in there. They were building buildings that had no rooftop yet, houses made out of concrete block. But, you know, you had a trail where you can, you know, people use it to walk across, so they can cross the bridge and go to the other subdivision on the other side of the forest. And that's what I did. This time I took my time. I walked, so I wasn't thinking anything of it, going towards the lady's house. When I showed up, you know, I paid, and they gave me it was about a pound of beans and maybe about 10 tortillas, and put them in the containers. Got the money, put it in my pocket, and started heading home. My grandma's. Well, literally, it gets dark fast, as you said, because it is where the equator is. And by, I think it was around 6 or so, The only thing is, I know that was the time because my mom gave me a watch and I cherished it, and it was a sports watch. And that's one thing I like because I like the light. I will always check the time on the light. And I looked at it and I was like, well, oh my God, it's already almost, 6:10, 6:15. And I'm like, well, I guess I, better run back because I'm going to be late. They're going to tell me something. But walking 30 minutes back and forth makes you tired. So I ran halfway. When I got to the bridge, I stopped and said, I'm going to walk it because I'm not that far from home. I'm about maybe, at the most, maybe a mile or a mile and a half. I'm crossing the bridge and I'm heading towards the development area. It was full moon. That was a good thing, I guess, in a way, because they had no lights in the development section. And the full moon, it literally shines everything. You don't really need you don't need light, artificial lights or lampposts to look. I could see the trail perfectly. I could see where I was going. So I'm walking on the trail. The development is on my right side. The creek and the forest is on the left. I'm starting to pass the development where the buildings are. It was on a hill. And at the top of the hill, once I got to the top of the hill, there was the last building development. I had about 4 to 5 blocks left towards my grandma. But at that particular spot is where my encounter happened. And what happened was, as I'm walking, the trail got close to the door of the building, within maybe 5 feet from it. The doors were, not there yet, but it was an open building. Had no windows, had no doors yet. It was under construction. And it had no roof. So, as I'm heading in there, I'm heading towards the trail, I'm passing the building. Something growled. And at that time, my country was overrun with dogs with rabies or dogs that were just out on the street, like homeless. And I thought, well, maybe because I like animals, maybe if it's a lost dog, I can, maybe feed it a little bit of what I have or, save it. And I guess in a way I was always curious. I was like, I said a rabbit dog. I've never seen one. I heard of them, but I never seen one. And my curiosity got the best of me. As I'm walking, I walk back 2 feet on the door. And I turn and I see the room. It's empty. It's dark. But the moonlight is hitting it at an angle. I see one corner to my right on the room is clean. There's nothing there. And then I look to the left. And that's where I spot something odd. I see like a jet black or darker than dark, big shadow, crouched. As soon as I'm looking at that, immediately my brain was like, well, that's definitely not a dog, but what is that? I mean, I stood there and I started noticing it moving up and coming up. As it came up, I saw the moonlight start showing features of it. The very first one that I saw was like pointy black ears, which I found very strange. And then it kept coming back up, like it kept standing up. And I was like, well, how big is this thing? This thing just kept getting up, higher, or I guess I will say taller. 7 years old, I'm maybe 4 feet 5 inches. I was not that big. Maybe 4 feet 7 at the most. Looking at this thing, I started to get a weird feeling. I'm like, I don't know what I'm looking at. Finally, it starts to move its, I'm not going to say they're hands. They look like hands, but with claws. They were real big. But not claws that are curved. It was just more longer. And the whole thing was black. Jet black hair. As it goes up, the moonlight starts showing me the facial features of it. I start seeing a snout. And I start seeing what looked like like what you will see on a wolf, canine. Suddenly I'm like, whoa, a wolf does not do that. A dog doesn't do that. And it hit me. There's only one thing this can be. I'm looking at a monster. And I think the thing that crossed my mind then is like, well, now I'm in trouble. I'm in danger. What do I do? My mind is taking time to process it. It's taking about 3 to 5 seconds to process this was a monster. Well, to me, as a kid, I'm thinking this in my head. When I realized that it was a monster, I made one mistake. It had not known that I was there because it was still facing away from me. But as soon as I realized what it was, I gasped. And that's when, my world came like to a halt because I knew that I shouldn't have gasped because I know that I gasped loud enough that it hurt me. And it did. It slowly started to growl more and it slowly started to turn towards me. And I start seeing these eyes that I didn't quite see a pupil, but all I saw was like a yellowish amber, and it was just creepy looking. So as if it was soulless. And the growl, once it hit me, I felt it, vibrating through my whole body. It made me shocked with fear. And I think at that time, my brain was like, you're in the door. If it's gonna come out, you need to get out of the way. I couldn't go to the right because that's going back towards more down the development and more wood. And I need to head home. And at this point, the only option I have is turn back to where I was going, which was home. But this time, I thank my lucky stars that I did not stay there, shocked with pride, and that I actually decided to run. Like there was no tomorrow. I ran as fast as I could towards home, screaming. And I was crying and screaming at the same time. It was a rough experience because I ran almost 5 blocks nonstop. And my grandma had her door open. They always do because they're always in the living room. And they were just getting ready for their body and they were just waiting on me. I ran into my grandma's house. I ran past my mom, past my grandma, my aunt and uncle, and my cousin. And I ran to the kitchen. Because the thought on my mind was like, this thing is behind me. And the only thing I can think of as a weapon were my grandma's kitchen knives. I know it sounds kind of crazy, but that's the only thing that, in my little head that I thought, hey, this is the only thing I got. And I thought I had to protect my mom and myself and my family. So I sat down the containers on the kitchen, went straight for both steak knives and pretty big, and I held them up and I said, it's coming, I'm ready. My family was in shock. They'd never seen me act like this. And they told my mom, he's pale as a ghost, what's wrong with him? My mom took me to my grandma's room to talk to me, what's going on? I told her I saw a monster. And it was not that far away from here, and I thought it was coming after me. She told me, don't worry, you're safe. After that, I used to be very jolly before this encounter, very outgoing. I will go out with my cousins. I will go out with my, uncle. We will run forest. We will go catch snakes, stuff like that. But after this happened to me, I couldn't do that anymore. I just couldn't do it. I was more, I guess, reserved, more introvert. I would rather, stay at home, read a book or listen to music, something else. But I wouldn't go to the bookstore myself. No, not knowing that was out there. And The day after this encounter, I went back to my mom, to her home, and I thought I was going to be okay. Well, I'm sitting in my bed trying to go to sleep, and all of a sudden I go into a dream state, and I start having this nightmare about this thing coming at me. And my nightmares will always be it coming at me and open its mouth and trying to literally chop my face off. And I will always wake up in sweat, in fear, screaming. This happened for a period almost a week at first, and then it went down to every other week. And then it slowed down because I tried my best not to dream. I tried my best to tire myself so that I would not have dreams, because they were all just nightmares about this thing. And it was almost the same scenario, always running towards me. I wanted to try to block it out, and it took me about, at the most, maybe 9 months to do it, but it was tough to deal with on my own. I reached out to my best friend who lived next door. She's a girl my age. And it was disappointing because instead of getting the support that I thought I was going to get from my best friend, all I got was, "You have an overactive imagination." That's what she told me. I couldn't get mad at her because I understand, well, she's never gone through it, but I was expecting more. And now, when I was 11, my mom, my stepdad, met, and he was a citizen from here, and they arranged it so that we could come to the U.S. I came here, I was 11 and a half, and started my life here. I thought in my head that I was away from where the monsters are in our country, because I heard, and I looked at it in my school in Nicaragua. A lot of it's in their folklore, it's in their history. And I thought, well, I've left my country, I left I'm sure here in the U.S. there are no monsters. But to my unpleasant surprise, slowly I began to hear about Michigan wolfmen or dogmen. And then as I started reading more, I looked at this website, Dogman Encounters, and decided to reach out to Vic, and he's been very helpful. He's helped me look at it in a way that I never did, and I'm grateful for it. And it's a good service he's giving to people like us that had this experience, because nobody seems to understand unless they go through it. But that's where I am now. That's basically what happened.
Episode 138, J.
This was in the beginning of April 2010, so it was early spring. We had been living on the ranch. We'd been brought in there while I was in school at the university. We'd been brought in by the family that owned the ranch. They brought us in to kind of keep an eye on the place. They had problems with poachers and other things like this. And it was a big ranch. That was their method of, I guess, maintaining the place. They only gave the house to people that were either law enforcement or people that were in the military or had been prior in the military and had security experience. So the couple that were living in the ranch house prior to us had moved out. It would have been a deputy sheriff and his wife, who was in medical school. They did move from the ranch. So we had moved in there, been living there maybe a little over a month, and everything was going fine. We would walk my wife's dog. It was a Schnauzer little dog. I couldn't just let it out the door because there were coyotes out there, bobcats. There's lots of hogs, things like this, and this is a small dog that's going to run off. So we had to keep him on a leash, and every evening after dinner, before we went to bed, I would take the dog, put him on a leash, and I'd walk him along the cattle fence right in front of our house, maybe 25 feet in front of the house, and just walk him along the fence line and let him do his business, and we would come back inside. So that is where we had our encounter. We'd been eating dinner and walked out the front door. I believe I was in front of my wife. Matter of fact, I know I was, but we did let the screen door slam. I was real good about that, so I made the noise usually scare off, anything that might otherwise attack you out of fear, bobcats, stuff like that. I made the loud noise usually to scare that kind of stuff off. So we did slam the screen door. We're coming down the steps, and my wife was behind me. We got up to the fence line. I carried, at that time, 1 million lumen Coleman, like mini lantern, spotlight type deal. I carried it and used it while I was walking the dog, just checking the woods, keep an eye out for anything. So I carried that as well as a 45 in a shoulder holster, and, that was kept, just for security reasons. Again, we did have poachers out there. There had also been an order to kill any hogs on site. They were causing a lot of damage on the ranch and some of the farming area. So, those orders were there as well. So I did carry it for that reason. But anyways, we were walking the dog up in front of the house, and I was talking to my wife over my shoulder. And I don't know why, I just clicked the button on the spotlight and kind of fanned it to the right of me. And when I fanned it over in that direction, that's when we seen it. It was right there. I could not believe what I was seeing. It was, less than 50 feet from us. It was standing by the large oak tree and the flower bed that sat on the right side of the house over there. It was standing right next to that. The light caught it dead on, right in the face. I didn't know how to process what I was seeing. The head, it was the biggest head that I thought I had ever seen on any living thing, in my life, up close and in person. The eyes were just shooting, right at me. It was unbelievable. They were a orange yellow color, real deep. And, I remember, kind of, again, trying to figure out, what do I do? In my head, what is this? I screamed back at my wife. She's behind me, and I said, "Are you seeing this?" And she says, "Yes, I'm seeing it." And she's starting to cry, not cry, but she's, startled, and she's crying back, "Yes, let's get inside now," and she's done took off running back to the front porch. And I'm backing up, but I'm keeping the light on it while I'm backing up with the dog, trying to get back to the porch. Going for the 45, that didn't even cross my mind. This thing was so big that the last thing I was thinking about at that point was my ability to shoot it. It was so close. I didn't think I could have got the 45 out, in time to shoot the thing anyways. And as I just knew, keep the light on it, back up. I'm terrified at what I'm seeing. And as I'm backing up, the thing starts, this is what scared me to death. The thing crouches down on two legs. As big as it was, crouches down, and it's focused right on me the whole time. So I finally get to the porch. I slam the screen door, lock it, not that it would have done any good. My wife's already inside. I get inside and I start screaming at her. I turn off all of the lights. The house we lived in was an antique farmhouse that had been put on that property 30 years before, I don't know. And it had been renovated. That was part of the deal when we moved in, is we couldn't add anything or do anything inside the house because it wasn't antique. All the glass was antique, which was bad because the glass is paper thin, but I believe we counted 16 windows in the house. So, when you're living out on a ranch and there's nobody around you for several miles, you just got woods, you don't really care about your privacy too much. But for this evening, it was really scary because the whole house was just ringed in windows, and it was these flimsy, antique windows. There were no blinds to pull, no drapes, no nothing. So I get inside and I just start screaming at my wife. I'm like, "Cut all the lights off." She's like, "What?" I said, "Shut every light off. I'm going into defensive mode here, like we're under attack." And I start panicking a little, but try to keep myself calm. And we start flipping the lights on. I screamed at my wife. I said, "Get the floodlights in the back that been cut on." We had a total of 8 floodlights that ringed the house. There were 2 floodlights on each corner of the home, and they were 150 watts. So we had her cut on the back floodlights. So I cut on the floodlights in the front. And at that point, I'm trying to fumble around in the dark just clicking the trigger on the light, trying to get to my shotgun and get my M4 type AR-15 out, and I'm trying to get them loaded. I kept number 4 buckshot tactical loads in the shotgun out there for rattlesnakes. We had a lot of rattlesnakes, and there was a possibility that I'd go run off a poacher or something. That's what I took. I knew what I seen, that wasn't going to do it. I did a box of double-aught buck and some slugs, and I started loading that in the shotgun. And even that, I would have been afraid shooting at this thing with that at too far of a range. I got my AR-15 out. I got a little light on it hooked up, and I did get a magazine in, and I felt a little more comfort because I assumed at that point, okay, we're inside. If it is coming for us, it's going to be coming from the light to the dark. I've got dark on my side, and if it does manage to get into a window, while it's getting into the window, I thought at least with, the M4, if I can pop it a few times right in the head, that should put it down regardless of how big it is. That was my thinking at that moment. So my wife's crying at this point. She has started crying actually. And, she's freaking out. I want to leave. And I knew, that was a bad idea. We had 3/4 of a mile to drive to get back up to the main gate. And then we had a security gate that would take, a good 30 seconds to open itself. Obviously something this big, we weren't going to outrun it in the car, trying to get in the car and get away. We had even had, deputy sheriffs in the past that had come out on the ranch for other things, make that comment about how far back we were. So I knew we weren't getting out of there in the car that night, and we were just going to have to wait it out and sit. So I'm trying to calm her down, and we, like I said, got all the lights off inside, and we just sat there. We knew where it was standing. It had been standing over at that large oak tree, and I believe that it had been watching us that evening through that window, eating dinner. It knew, it knew we were coming outside. It heard us. It wasn't afraid. It didn't try to run off. It had actually been standing there watching us. So anyways, we sat there in the dark for the rest of the evening, and we did not, or I didn't feel comfortable until the sun started coming up a little after 5 in the morning. Once lights started breaking, I waited until I could see well enough out there, and I went back out on the porch and started looking around. I wanted to see if I could, I could see the thing still there. Obviously, at this point, it was gone. But it was a long night. That went from, probably 9:30, 10 o'clock till after 5 a.m. the next morning. So, it was a long night of sitting there. You know this thing's out there and you can't see it. It was an experience that really did change me.
Well, that was our last episode for the night. Have a great night, everyone, and a great weekend. I'll catch you next week. Thanks for listening.